This is class 6 of the last class of the series of Introduction to the Kabbalah. I think what we'll do today is we'll change it up. Instead of starting with the history part, maybe we'll reverse the order because I want to see how much time we have left to give proper time to the second part of this year. So maybe we'll reverse it. Okay, the second part of this year is very, very important because I think one of the biggest challenges of learning real Kabbalah, right? Not just learning about Kabbalah, but learning the real thing, is not really seeing the end picture of the sefirot. Because the main thing we want to reach when we start learning the whole, first phase of the Arizal, eventually what we want to get to is we want to get to really understanding, or more like seeing how the sefirot work and what are they. But the challenge is that you don't even know what they are, and you're already starting to learn about the evolution of the sefirot, which is the pre-sefirot, and that's when people get lost. Because you get into technical detail, and you're like, wow, this doesn't look so spiritual. It looks like very scientific, and I'm not getting it. And then you lose motivation. And many people who tried going into this dropped out because of this, because they didn't see the big picture. And the big picture of the Sefirot is actually the introduction. Before starting learning the Arizal, we need to know what the concept, what does Sefirot mean, right? So we spoke about this whole contraction, the tzimtzum, right? The inner conceptual space, right? Called the tzimtzum, the contraction. And we spoke about the circle and the line, these two concepts, that the line basically represents the hishtalshelut, right? The going down from the Ein Sof to like the lowest world, right? So when we talk about sefirot, we're talking about in this dimension of the line, of the kav, that there's levels, and it's almost like there's a hierarchy. Not everything is the same, at least from our perspective. We see that there's good and bad, and we see that there's, different madrigot. So within the Hishtalshelut is where we see the sefirot. But what are the sefirot? This is what we have to understand. And this took me a while to chop it. Basically, when we read last time, the sefirot are actually, they serve several purposes. They're the basic forces of existence. The way I would put it is like the energy of life. God is the source of all life, right? The Ein Sof. And God channels his force of life and energy through the sefirot. So you could call the sefirot windows, you could call them channels, but they serve several purposes. What they do is, first of all, they're part of the tzimtzum, of the contraction. The sefirot have a role in this because they also diminish the light of the Ein Sof and basically give it some shape. So in other words, if we're talking about a sefirah called Sfirat Chokhmah, right? Sfirat Chokhmah is like number 2. We have Keter. Let's repeat these. This is like, by the time you finish this, you're going to know, like when I started learning this, I'm like, how do you remember these names of the sefirot, Jamie? Yeah. It's pretty hard, right? By the time you finish this, you're gonna be swinging with these things. You're going to be swinging with these names, right? The sefirot basically encompass all of existence. But on the basic level, they're part of the tzimtzum, because basically you're taking the infinite light, which is shalem in every way, and you're actually limiting it to certain sefirot that have a koach to be manhig, to govern the world, but it's diminished. So in that sense, the sefirot are part of the tzimtzum, right? And there's 10 of them. And the more you go down in the levels of a sefirot, the more the light becomes more and more diminished. So in that sense, the sefirot serve as what's called levushim, or kelim, but they're also made of, actually, they have part of the infinite light in them. And what is the infinite light? I go back to the example of the light bulb. You have the light bulb, and you have the circuit. So in the sefirot, we have a similar thing. We have, just like you have a physical body, and you have a neshama, right? And then you have the levush, right? If you were to take the physical body, and a body is a concept, it doesn't have to be physical. a body is actually a concept. A body means that it's something that's hosting something that's activating it. That's a source of life to it. The body doesn't give us life. The life comes from the neshama. The body's activated, but it hosts the neshama. Just like the candle hosts the flame. You can't have a flame without a candle. But if you have a candle without a flame, you have no light. Right? Similarly, you have a body without a neshama, you have nothing. But a neshama needs a body. So if you take this concept into the spiritual realm, you have a body and you have a neshama, but not physical. You have the same concept. One is a receiving, kli, and one is a giver. This is the basic infrastructure of the entire universe. You always have two things that are intertwined, kli and o. And the sefirah is also made of the same components. Kli, it's a goof, and it's also an o. But what's the o? So this took me a while to just chop it. The o is actually godly names. Shmot Havaya. The Yud Hey Vav Hey, we say Havaya, right? The Shmot Havaya are all encompassing of existence. On a macro level and a micro level. It starts with the Yud Hey Vav Hey that encompass all of the inner space. All of the inner space is broken up to 4 basic dimensions. Atzilut, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya. And you have, before Atzilut, Adam Kadmon. All these are alluded to in the 4-letter name. The Yud is Atzilut. The Hey is Bria. The Vav is Yetzira. And the Hey is Asiya. And the Kutso Shel Yud, the chupchik of the Yud, is Adam Kadmon. This is on the macro. But in each dimension, you also have this breakdown of the 4-letter name. In Atzilut, you have 5 groups of sefirot called parzufim, which we'll get into. You're not supposed to know what the word parzufim, which means personifications. You're not supposed to know what it means at this stage. But it's broken down also into the same layer. The Yud is Chokhmah. The Hey, Binah. The Vav is 6 sefirot Zeranpin. That's why Vav is 6. And the last one is Malchut, is another Hey. And the chupchik of the Yud is Keter. In an individual sefirah, also the Shem Havaya breaks down into, take for example, one sefirah of Malchut. Malchut also has its own 10 sefirot, and also all of them, basically the life force is the 4-letter name behind everything. This is like the building block of the light. So when we say Or, you should know Or means godly names. Where do we see this? Let's read Bet in the Ramban. The Ramban basically, historically, you should know the Ramban, the Zohar, the Kabbalah pre-existed the Zohar. Obviously, we know the Kabbalistic tradition dates back, way back, all the way to Moshe Rabbeinu, when the first text that was published was Sefer Yetzirah, and that was that's dated back to Avraham Avinu. Certain things were added, but Kabbalah existed before the Zohar. Ramban came 100 years after the Zohar was published by Ramdal. Ramdal is Rabbi Moshe de Leon. It's a whole story how the Zohar came into the public eye. So the Ramban had real Kabbalah, and he writes, this is the Hakdama to the Torah. Od yesh beyadenu Kabbalah, right? Shel emet. Ki kol haTorah kula, the entire Torah, shmotav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, are all shmot havaya, godly names. She'atevot mitchalkot leshemot be'inyan echad. All the words in the Torah can be divided into different meanings. Ki'ilu tachshov al derech mashal. For example, he gives an example. Ki bepasuk bereshit. Take the word bereshit. You could take the word bereshit, bara Elokim, right, as berosh, itbara, Elohim. This is an example of shmot havaya, right? V'chen kol haTorah ken. The entire Torah is just a sequence of shmot havaya. Milvad. This is excluding the equidistant letter skipping. Tzirufehem, gimatria. That's not including the numerical value shel shemot. V'chen katav Rabbeinu Shlomo, meaning Rashi. Rashi from here is a source that Rashi was a mekubal, because Rashi says that the 72-letter name of God, which basically can consist of 272 times 3 is 216. So you have 72 three-letter names, right? All alluded to in 3 psukim in the Torah, which is Vayisa, Vayavo, Vayet. Each of these psukim contains 72 letters, and there's a combination of one letter from each pasuk into like 3 letters, right? And there's 72 of them. So all these are like, this is called the Shem Havaya of 72 names, right? So this is like one of the names, Shmot Havaya. And we have several Shmot Havaya. We don't just have one. We start with the basic 4-letter name, but that name branches out into several names, right? And when we talk about O, and we talk about Hishtalshelut, this is the O. It's all names. It's all about names and letters, Shmot Havaya. And this is like the evolution. The sefirot basically are made of, this is what gives them their like life force. And the body part of the sefirah is also names, but lower level. Because the sefirot are basically made of names. Okay, so you just have that in the background when you're learning about sefirot. When you're talking about what is this light? What am I saying? Like we think about light, we think about physical light. It's not physical light. We're talking about Shmot Havaya. So you have to get that in your head. The existence behind everything in this material world and the spiritual world are all godly names. It's all about information. That's what's out there. The sefirot basically contain all this, right? And each sefirah has a different name of Shem Havaya. So, let's go to Seif Gimel. In Seif Gimel, we see that the Shem Etzem, the basic 4-letter name, right, contains all of the sefirot. We spoke about that earlier. The Yud is Chokhmah. The Spitz of the Yud is the Keter, right? The Hey is Binah. The Vav is 6 sefirot. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. You see on the left side the illustration. And the last Hey is Keneged the Malchut. Now, the Shem Havaya can be written in 4 letters, which is called Shem Etzem, but it can be written fully. Fully is Maleh. What does Maleh mean? It means like not Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, but Yud, Vav, Daled, Hey, Yud, and then Vav, Yud, Vav, and then Hey, Yud, Vav. That's called Maleh. In other words, you're spreading the name. You're like pronouncing each letter. You're not just writing the letter, but you're writing the entire letter as a word, right? That's called Shem Maleh. Okay, the 4-letter name basically can be written in 4 different types of variations. The highest one equals 7, the numerical value of 72. It's called Shem Ayin Bet. It's called Shem Ayin Bet because it's a Havaya that's written with Hey, Yud, Yud Vav Daled, Hey, Yud, Vav Yud Vav, Hey Yud. That's called Shem Ab, Ayin Bet. Beneath that you have Shem Sag. It's the same thing with one difference. It's instead of Vav Yud Vav, it's Vav Aleph Vav. Lower Havaya. Then you have Shem Mem Hey. Same thing, different Milui, and then you have Shem Ben. So when we start learning about Sefirot, right, we basically talk about one of these, right, how it evolved before the Sefirot came into being, how it evolved, and how it formed the Sefirah. And this is the most challenging part of the learning. If you pass this level, then you see the Gan Eden. Then you see the light. But many people at this level, they drop. Because it gets so technical, they don't even see where it's going. Because they don't even know what even Sefirah means. So this is why we're learning this, so you understand the big picture first. You understand like the forest, and then you see the trees. A Sefirah, we said, is made of lights And that's Shmot Havaya. Dalid. But the Sefirah is also Kelim. Right? What does the Sefirah do? The Sefirah is basically to contract the light and give it a shape. Every Sefirah is a force of life, of existence. The entire physical universe and spiritual universe is basically governed by 10 basic forces. These 10 basic forces are the Sefirot. Everything gets compartmentalized in one of these, whatever you look at it. Whether it's, laws of nature, whether it's human emotions. I mean, if we look around, who's in this entire physical world, who's the one who grabs all the attention, who actually is worth of study? A man. Animals, we could basically sum it up, very basic. Laws of nature, pretty basic. It's us. We're very murkavim. We have thoughts, we have emotions, we have midot, we have all this stuff, right? It's a very complex system, right? Everything else is pretty simple. You don't go studying there's nothing really out here except us. We're we have consciousness, we have, this higher level of being. So everything about us, really about our world, basically is traced into the 10 sefirot. They govern all the forces that affect us in our experience in the physical world, right? So each one has a specific midah and tchuna. In that way, they're called kelim, because they're kelim. Basically, they take this godly light and they basically channel it into a certain power and limit it into that power. In that way, they're doing a type of seder within the infinite light and giving it shape. So it's just like the body, gives shape to the neshama. The neshama otherwise would be it has to be contained in a kli, right? And the kli gives it a shape. And lastly, the sefirot are also called levushim. This point means that each sefirah, the higher you go in the hierarchy of the light, all the way to the Ein Sof, it becomes more concealed than the light beneath it. So what happens is that because the whole mahalach is contraction, so we can receive it, so we can get it down here and also the lower worlds, there's a process that each sefirah is mitlabesh inside the sefirah that's under it. So for example, chokhmah is not like chokhmah and then there's bina. No. Chokhmah and bina work together. There's chokhmah in bina. Bina is not onto itself. Chokhmah is mitlabesh in bina. And both of these are mitlabesh into the lower sefirot, but in a concealed way. And in that way, you're getting basically contraction of the light, but you're also getting forces that are working together. One is underneath the surface and one is more above the surface, but they're all connected to each other. So that's called levushim. That's called that the light is clothed. Levushim means that the sefirot are one inside the other. One is mitlabesh, clothed inside the other. And the higher one is always considered a neshama in comparison to the lower one, which is like the guf, right? So in this sense, the sefirot are orot, shem havaya, kelim, the body, and levushim, clothed. Now, here comes the bomb. This is, for personal experience, when I started learning this stuff, one of the things that once you want to kind of give up is you don't understand what the heck is a sefirah. What are we talking about? And then if I can't understand it, why am I even learning it? This is so abstract. Where does this exist? How can I feel this? How can I connect to this? It's something that, in general, anything spiritual, if you think about it, most observant Jews, they have no idea what they're doing. They do things, right? That they look at the physicality of the Torah. They look at the mitzvot. If you ask them, wait a second, what's God? Contemplate on that. Spiritual. It's an idea. People live in concepts and ideas. They have no connection to anything spiritual because they can't quantify it. It's not finite. People have no connection to something purely spiritual because it's very hard. Because people want to something tangible, something they can measure and see and touch and explain and control and and probe. But spirituality is not. So that's one obstacle when learning about the sefirot. But that said, take for example neshama. Neshama, most people don't have a clue what it is, but they're comfortable with the neshama. I believe there's a neshama. It's easy for them to connect to. You know why? Because neshama has a kesher to something like this. They see the goof is moving. Like, oh, what's moving this? There's an association with something physical. They're like, okay, neshama. That's what activates this thing, and that's okay, fine. So I can't understand neshama on its own, but is there an through association we get neshama? Take for example, angel. Angels are spiritual agents, right? People seem to maybe be comfortable with angels. You know why? Because it's what they do. They have a tafkid. So through association with doing, again, or something like that, people say, oh, angels, okay, say that. They don't fully get it, but sefirot is beyond this. Sefirot, you have no association to anything almost, until you start learning them, and then you understand that it's everything. Okay? This is in Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer Yetzirah tells us, over here in Seif Zayin, it alludes to this. Eser sefirot belima. In the entire first chapter of Sefer Yetzirah, this is repeated all again and again. When it's talking about different things of the sefirot, it starts with the same sentence. Eser sefirot belima. Now, what does the word belima mean? Belima has two meanings. Bli, ma, without what, meaning like nothingness. Okay. And then there's blima. Right. Hey, put something over your mouth. Blom picha miledaber. Right? Like you put a muzzle. Let's start with the first meaning. Nothingness. What this means, and by the way, I recommend after we go through the first phase of Otzot Chaim, learn Sefer Yetzirah with Rav Aryeh Kaplan. It'll be like taking drugs. Not that I know what taking drugs means, but you feel like, wow, he's...
If you want any kind of reference from Jamie Paris,
Okay, thank you for that. Anyways, the first meaning Belima is like this. This expresses the nature of the sefirot as being something which you cannot express because they don't have any association to anything material. Like for example, if you take letters, right? Letters have a sound to them. You can say ooh, e. They have a shape. You could look at the letter. You can talk about letters. But the sefirot, they have nothing to attach itself to through which you can understand it. So it's called nothingness, blima. Right? So it's telling us this because don't try to understand them in the usual way you understand things because you won't be able to. And that's our problem. We're conditioned to trying to understand the spiritual world with the same type of consciousness or faculties that we understand things that have association to the physical world. And so Sefer Yetzirah is telling you, don't do that. That's not the way to connect to sefirot. You can't understand them in the same way. Blima, nothingness. Another meaning of blima is one word. Like the pasuk says, Al tiyu kesus, do not be like horses, kepered en havin. I heard something nice, Sachida says, just on a side note, pered is pshat, remesh, drash. If you don't have the samich, the sod, you're a pered, like a mule. Anyways, don't be like a horse, kepered en havin, bemetek varesen edio livlom. Basically, it's like the word blima over here means that he's got something on his mouthpiece which prevents him. It's called in, what's it called in English? It's a fancy word. No, fancier word. It's like Google Translate word. You have to look it up. I forget the word.
A lisp?
Huh?
A lisp?
Nah.
Speech impediment?
No, it's like a, it's a noun. It's not like an object. It's more like an action or passive. Anyways, blima means basically, for example, getting the first meaning when we said blima is nothingness connects to the pasuk tole eretz, God suspends the world al belima, right? This is a pasuk in Job. God put the physical world and the universe on nothingness, blima, sefirot, meaning what's everything sitting on? Nothing. But the nothing is the biggest something there is. It's not nothing. It's nothing that's everything. Okay, but the second meaning, blima, means blom picha mildaber. It basically means that the sefirot is basically something that you can't talk about. You can't really, if you come and you want to try to grasp them, don't try. Blom picha mildaber. This is mentioned in the Mishnah Chet in Sefer Yetzirah. So basically, why are we dealing with sefirot? How do we connect to the sefirot? And this is very important. If you understand this, if you connect to this, learning the first part of the Kabbalah is basically the evolution of the sefirot. It makes it so much easier. If you don't understand it, you get lost. Looks like you're dealing with technical stuff over here. But once you understand the big picture of the sefirot, and afterwards, you're like, wow. So, how do we understand sefirot? Rav Aryeh Kaplan, basically, so we have a Mishnah on the back side, Seif Chet. The Mishnah says, Haven bechokhmah uchkam babina. So we know there's Sfirat Chokhmah and there's Sfirat Bina. Just so you understand. So it says here, understand with wisdom and be wise with understanding. This is not a riddle. There's a deep, deep wisdom in this Mishnah of Sefer Yetzirah that tells us about how to connect to Sefirot. But in order to understand that, we first have to understand the difference between Chokhmah as a Sfirah and Bina as a Sfirah. And then you'll understand how the human faculties correspond to the features of the Sfirot, right? Because we also have Chokhmah, the right side of the brain, and we have Bina, which is like the left side. In the Sfirot, you have Sfirat Chokhmah. The Sfirat Chokhmah is called the undifferentiated mind, capital mind. Meaning, there's like a godly consciousness that we're all part of right now. Right? You feel like you're being looked at, or everything you think about, there's a godly consciousness, like, I don't know, some cultures refer to it as different names. There's like there's a godly consciousness that governs this world. It's called the undifferentiated mind, right? Toda'a elokit chasad. Now, this level is a level where everything is a single unity. It's a pure thought. It's not broken into anything. As a single unity, basically we're saying that there's a consciousness that sometimes you see something and you understand all the pieces. Like in Yam Suf, when they had this the nevuah of Az-Shir, they saw everything in one. And they said Shirah. This is like a state of consciousness where there's pure thought that's not broken into different ideas. It's just like one unifying thought. That's the essence of Sfirat Chokhmah. Sfirat Chokhmah is a level of one pure thought. There's no past, future, and there's no different ideas. It's called the undifferentiated mind, right? And that is actually the Sfirah that's above Bina. The Sfirah of Bina is a force that is actually takes Chokhmah and breaks it into ideas and things that you can actually study on their own. Bina comes from the Hebrew word ben. Not ben like son, which also ties into it, but ben is like between. In other words, it's like separating. The force of Bina is taking something pure and separating it and giving it form and shape into single entities. That's Binah, right? So that's called simple. That's called the differentiated mind. So if you look in Bereshit, for example, this is alluded to in the whole story of creation. The word Elohim is actually associated with Binah. And everything in nature works like there's an amazing Kulam bechokhma asita, but it's through Binah that everything gets a certain order and everything becomes like there's different entities in creation, all under the same word Elokim. And it's not by coincidence, because Elokim is the godly name that goes through Sfirat Binah. So Binah means, and Elokim means Ribui shel Kochot. Elokim is a plural. It means multiple, right? Multiplicity. When we spoke about the Olamot, when we spoke about Atzilut, we spoke about Atzilut as being a world where everything is one, right? That corresponds to Chokhmah, Sfirat Chokhmah. Single unity. There's no evil, no good and bad. There's no duality in Atzilut. Same thing in Chokhmah. In the world under that, which is Bria, that corresponds to Binah. That's when this single unity starts taking like now different forms, like Ribui. There's like good, bad. There's dualities. So this is as a Sfira. This is the nature of Chokhmah. This is the nature of Binah. Okay? So the mashal is beautiful. Chokhmah is like water. Water has no shape. If you spill water, water will go everywhere. But if you put water in a kli, right, then water gets a shape. Chokhmah is like water. On its own, it has no form, no shape. It's like a substance that. But what Binah does to Chokhmah is basically what pipes do to water. The pipes basically take the water and they channel them in different directions. So that is the relationship between Binah and Chokhmah. Chokhmah is a male feature, the Zachar, and Binah is a female. If you look at the male has the Zera, right? The Zera is the seed, right? That seed has life potential, right? To bring life. But it needs something to take it in and to nourish it and to give it form. That's the female. That's what Binah. So what the female, and you should know, everything you see down here, one of the things that like you start appreciating women much more after you learn this sefirot. No, you start appreciating creation. You start seeing the miracle here. You're like, wow, male, female, wow, this exactly ties into this whole thing. This is all the same thing. It's like the higher order and the lower order. You see it. So this is the nature of sefirot. Let's take it into the human side. We have chokhmah, a faculty called chokhmah down here, which corresponds to the sfirat chokhmah, and we have a faculty called binah, understanding. What are they? So the way Rav Aryeh Kaplan says it beautifully is like this. Chokhmah, and this ties into Eastern religions and cultures, is a state of consciousness that's not is called wisdom consciousness. Muda'ut chokhmah is basically something that has, what is the word that he used? Chokhmah lo milulit. Machshava lo milulit. It's basically having a thought without saying anything. Try that. You could do it for a few seconds, and then you'll say, "Oh, I'm having it," and that's already machshava milulit, right? This is what's called toda'at or muda'ut chokhmah. It's a faculty where you are able to actually connect to something through pure consciousness without words. It's not just like the silence. It's without giving it any form. You're able to understand, not to understand it, you're able to connect to it as a pure thought. That's called chokhmah, toda'at chokhmah. And on the other hand, we have most of our thoughts which come with words, which we talk to ourselves, like we spell them out, and we think and we talk at the same time. That's binah. You cannot understand the sefirot with the regular mode of toda'at bina. You have to connect to them through toda'at chokhmah, which is consciousness. It's beyond mind. It's not mind. In other words, the Kabbalists, what they did is through learning, meditation, and doing things, they actually developed this capacity to reach levels of consciousness where they're connecting to the sefirot. They're not like understanding the sefirot, right? They're connecting to them. And this is how you connect to sefirot. It's something spiritual. It's not something like trying to control them and, quantify them and, and speak it out. So the Mishnah is saying like this: Haven bechokhmah, huchkam bebina. You have two modes of thinking. You have the bina consciousness and you have the chokhmah consciousness. Sefer Yetzirah is telling you, in order to connect to the sefirot, you have to oscillate between these two faculties. You have to, grasp them through muda'ut chokhmah, and then from that you oscillate to muda'ut bina, and you start understanding certain things. But it goes like from one to the other. And this is how you connect to sefirot. On some levels, like you could even like sometimes just like learn, and then suddenly, woof, you just have this thing that you start like, oh, wow. And it's like a flash, right? It doesn't last very long, but you feel like you connected to something, right? That's how the sefirot work. It doesn't work like math. It doesn't work like Talmud. Like, oh yeah, Kal v'chomer. It's not that. That's Binah. That's why Talmud is Etz Hadat, Tov v'Ra. It's linked to duality, Binah. Like things that are mechulakim, ideas. Kabbalah is Chokhmah. It's the Yud. It's before Binah, right? So this is something you develop as you learn. The people who come and think, oh, I'm going to master this like I'm going to master Talmud, they get frustrated and leave because they don't get it. This is operating on a different level. But once you connect to it, you develop the capacity to connect to things beyond Binah. And then you start seeing things. The big Kabbalists did meditative practices, and they were able to like see beyond past, future, see things that other people don't see at all. It's called hasagot. Hasagot, I don't know how to say it in Hebrew, in English. Hasagot is like people who have, it's not visions, it's like they have a certain level of connection to something other people don't. The Arizal's hasagot were like, all right, but besides that Arizal, this is hasagot means that a person reached a level that he's developed this capacity of his muda'ut chokhmah. And that's the way to get into sefirot. So this part of the introduction, we could go on and talk about things, but our purpose is that we set things out that where we're headed to. We're learning how these sefirot evolved, and it's very important to learn how they evolved and what happened in between, because otherwise you'll never really understand the sefirot, how they work after they were formed. So you have to go through the evolution of the sefirot first, and there's a lot in there. But once you get the picture and you see the sefirot, then you could learn other texts as well. You could learn Sefer Yetzirah, you could learn Sefer Abahir, and they talk about sefirot. But if you don't understand how the sefirot evolved, you'll never really understand what's going on. And that's what that Arizal did. Up to that Arizal, basically, the people who had it didn't write it down, and basically people learned sefirot, but they didn't have everything about the evolution of the sefirot and what happened in between. And that's very, very important. And it's basically what the book Otzot Chaim starts out with. And this is what the Arizal brought down, basically. Not just that, many things, but the whole evolution. So we just have to understand that we have to start feeling comfortable at something that we don't understand at first. But once you get it, you'll see something, you'll start looking at the entire, everything around you differently, completely, entire existence differently, of this physical world and of and everything that goes on to the world. Like you'll trace everything to this field. You'll see like, well, these are the governing forces. This is what's like everything. So this is now we reverse ordered today. We said we're going to start today with the conceptual and go now to the history, because you guys were good kids, so now you get story time. All right, so now let's go to the story time. Also, this part we're going to continue with all this because there's so much to say. We might do it in a different. We might spend, instead of 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there, we might spend 20, 40. 20 on the history part, but there's so much. So I'm just like, each time I try to like focus on something, but there's a lot. So today the focus is Chavurat Ari, because Chavurat Ari is basically, the idea is to get here that as a group, what happened to the Ari and Chavurah, stories, what was unique about their Hanhagot, what did they do, what happened when they were together. That's basically what we're going to be covering in the history part today. So we have the Hanagot al-Chaverim. So one of the Talmidim of the Arizal told Rav Shlomo. Rav Shlomo is, remember, he's the rabbi who came in 1600 from Poland, and he had first-hand contact with Talmidei Ari, the ones who were still alive, and he's getting first-hand stories. That's why I bring you only these stories. There are stories that date back to 150 years after the Arizal's passing. I don't bring those. You know why? Because I have safek. Like, for example, there was this amazing story about the Arizal and the Ramah and the Rashal, and the Ramah and the Rashal wanted to excommunicate the Arizal. And the Arizal sent Rab Chaim Vital. And it's a story like, wow. But then when I looked at the source of the story, it dates back to a book called Masaot Yerushalayim. And Masaot Yerushalayim is basically 1800s. And it's Admoni Munkatz, Hasidic, so maybe 100% true. But since it wasn't first-hand, I don't bring it. The stories that you see over here are coming as close to the source as possible. That's why I like these stories so much, because I know I could rely on them, because someone talked to the Talmid of the Ari. So, anyways, this story is straight from Rav Shlomo's, interaction with the Talmid of the Ari. One of the things that the Talmidei Ari did is they always used to accept Shabbat outside. And all their learning would be outside. They wouldn't learn in the Beit Midrash. Very unconventional. Now, and he talks about certain experiences, and this is one of the stories through which we see that Arizal potentially was Mashiach ben Yosef. He tells the following story. וסיפר לי תלמיד הארי החכם הרב גדליה הלוי שבימי הארי בכל ערב שבת every Erev Shabbat, שהלכו חוץ לעיר, they'd go outside of Tzfat, להגביל שבת, היה החכם ז"ל, meaning the Ari, מספר לתלמידיו נוראות ונפלאות, מה שראה בכל יום פעם ופעם. He would tell the students things that he saw all the time. ותמיד היה מעמיד את עצמו על ההר אחד, and he would always stand on this high mountain, שהיה חוץ לעיר, outside of Tzfat, ושם ראה את כל בית החיים של צפת. From there he could see all the cemetery of צפת. וראה חיילות של נשמות שעולים מן בית הקברות. He would see scores of neshamot who would ascend from the cemetery Erev Shabbat למעלה בגן עדן של מעלה. So you understand, there's what's called Gan Eden Elyon, Gan Eden Tachton, right? And what happens is, this is discussed in the Zohar, that when a person passes away, if he's worthy, his soul breaks into three places. So he's not limited by body, right? He's got nefesh, the lowest part of the soul. He's got his ruach, another part of the soul, and he's got neshama, right? Another part of the soul. These three can go in different directions. And for us, it's hard to understand, especially when you have consciousness after death. How could a person be in a kever, but he's also somewhere else? This is because we're in a body, right? We can't understand how Eliyahu Navi could be at a Brit Milah here and in America at the same time either, right? But this is what the spiritual dimension is all about, right? Anyways, when a person passes away, The lowest part of the person, called the nefesh, is near the kever, not just during the shiva, all the time. This is the source for going to kivrei, to kavod. We don't go to pray to the stone or to memorialize someone like, oh, I remember you. They're there, the nefesh. The ruach enters a place, if he's worthy, called Gan Eden Tachton. It's called the lower Gan Eden. Where is it? It's in Olam HaAsiyah, not in Olam Hazeh, but Olam HaAsiyah, which we talked about. It's a spiritual world. That's called Gan Eden Tachton. And throughout the whole week, that's where the person is. And then there's what's called Gan Eden Elyon. And this is what he's talking about. There's a transition that he sees them every Shabbat going from Gan Eden Tachton to Gan Eden Elyon. And the Arizal would see it, not with the physical eyes, but he saw it every Erev Shabbat. Scores of neshamot going to Gan Eden Shel Mala. This is his students saying, that the Arizal would tell them. V'chen lehefech, he would also see coming down, like the ladder of Yaakov. Al revavot sheyardu kenegdam. Ve'elu hen haneshamot ha'yiterot hamidvasfot b'Yisrael. These are the neshama yitera that comes down every Erev Shabbat to the Jews that he would see coming down. Umitoch rov bilbul, since he was like so overwhelmed, ve'irbuv neshamot v'chayalot asher sham, since he was like overwhelmed with this whole thing, kahu enav mirot v'uchach la'atzom enav, he would have to like close his eyes because it was too intense. V'afal piken, even so, ra'at kol hadvarim be'inayim sgorot, he would see it with closed eyes. This is a story from a Talmid of the Arizal, telling them what the Arizal would tell him, right? So he would see all these neshamot, right? This is part of why this stuff would happen a lot when they would go outside.
The neshamot coming down or entering live bodies?
Exactly. Neshama yitera.
Not going to kfarot.
No. That's why you don't go to kever on Shabbat or Rosh Chodesh, because they're not there. They're not there. That's why we don't go visit Kivrei Tzadikim on Shabbat. They're not there. They come back after Shabbat. That's why we say Tziduk Adin, Tzidkatcha. Because some go to, not so pleasant places, Gehenom, but on Shabbat, they're in Gan Eden Elyon. Now, another thing that we learned from the Chaburat Ha'ari about Kabbalat Shabbat, another story. And by the way, this is Minhag Yerushalayim, just like the Arizal. In my Bet Knesset, that's also the Minhag. Probably the only one in town. It goes like this. One time before bringing in the Shabbat, he would wear 4 articles of white clothing. He wouldn't start with Lechun Eranana, he would start with Mizmor LeDavid. Mizmor Avul Hashem B'nei Elim. Upizmon Meyusad LeKabal Shabbat, that's Lecha Dodi. You have to understand, this was only instituted 20 years before the Arizal arrived. It already caught on. This is Rav Shlomo Elkabetz, the big Mikubal. He was the teacher of the Ramak, of Moshe Cordovero. He was the Chevruta of Marana Bet Yosef. They both made Aliyah because of the Magid. He made this Pizmon. He doesn't even say the name. He just says Pizmon Miyusad LeKabalat Shabbat. That's Lecha Dodi. So the order is Mizmor LeDavid, Lecha Dodi, and then Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbat, and then Hashem Malach. Benigun Na'eh, with a nice nigun. So one time the Rav turned to his students and says, who wants to go to Yerushalayim? And he says, Yerushalayim, it's more than 23 parsaot. A parsa is like 4 miles. So he's saying more than 23 parsaot. We know today is even more than that. But he said, so they're like, some people are scratching their, how the heck are we going to get to Yerushalayim before Shabbat? Right? We have to ask our wives. Those were like good husbands. Another mistake. When they said that, the rabbi became very terrified and anxious. And he hit his hands together. He says, Oy lanu, we just lost our opportunity for the Geulah. If all of you would answer me as one, because some did want to go. All of Israel would be redeemed. She'ata hayta hasha'ah ha'omedet ligel. This was like sha'at ratzon. Umitoch shemi'antem, since you turned it down, badavar chazara galut leitana. Right? So, this is one of the stories that Rav Chaim Vital says that they should have understood that he's Mashiach ben Yosef. There's a few stories. Another instance, they were learning on a weekday in the field. He saw that all the trees, there were neshamot by the tens of thousands. There was a river near Tzfat over there. He saw neshamot on the surface of the river. He asked the neshamot, what are you doing here? What do you need? They heard on the other side that he's got the koach to bring them a tikkun, a rectification. They're neshamot that were ousted because they didn't do tshuva. They can't enter where they need to be. And they told him about all the different gilgulim that they have to go through. He promised them that he would do his best to try to elevate them. And then he told his students what he saw. They saw him talking. And they thought, like, who's he talking to? Then he told them everything. In other words, when the Arizal would go out in the field, you have to understand, this is first-hand stories. The students are reporting what they saw him doing. He would see things. Sometimes he would go in the field and he would tell them, let's turn right. Why are we going that way? He would see things. Right? He was able to see neshamot, right? And this is nothing. When we get to other parts, it's like, this is not like, it's not paranormal. It's way beyond paranormal. And this is coming first-hand from Israel. So this is another reason why they would always be outside, is because outside is where all the action was. All right. Another thing that the Ari was very, very, Hanaga, that he was very, very careful about, is called Ahavat HaChaverim. There's a yeshiva, not yeshiva, in Yerushalayim, Rav Yaakov Hillel runs institutions it's called Chevrat Ahavat Shalom. The history of this place, it's a yeshiva of Mekubalim and Pshat, but it was founded over 250 years ago, that name, by the Rashash and other Chaverim. It all comes from the Arizal. The Arizal took this motto, Chaverim, and he basically said to learn Torah, especially Chokhmat HaSod, you have to be that each person is mamash, not just declaring Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha, he mamash is mitbatel towards his fellow, not just his Rav. All the Chaverim, they would love each other like Ahavat Nefesh. He got this from Rashbi. In the Zohar it also says that the way to connect to the light is as a group. Like there's no ego at all. They would practice this. Why? Because together you're able to get more. This is the same mahalach of the sefirot. When the sefirot were working as individuals, they broke. There was shvira. They couldn't take the light. When they worked together, they were able to receive the light. Same thing in our human world. The chaverim have to have a kesher that's so strong of a bond in order to receive the light. So he always warned them about ahavat hachaverim. And this actually is why the whole group, the whole thing ended as it ended. In the hesger. The Harizal made a seger, a quarantine. Some say it was because there was a disease spreading. There was like a magefa. Some say that it was just because to make them to take them out of their environment. And that seger is when he died. So let's read in the seger and what happened there. So he made this thing that they went to this village, him and the 10 families. ואותה החצר של ההסגר עצמו. That same courtyard that they used is where all the families lived. בסוף 5 חודשים, after 5 months of being there, נפלה קטטה. There was some type of quarrel. בין הנשים, between the ladies, the women, בערב שבת. והנשים הגידו אותו לבעליהם, and the women told it to their husbands. ונמשך עד שגם החברים התקוטטו. Then they also got into it, the men. There was a conflict of some sort. והרב עליו השלום תמיד היה מזהיר אותם על האחווה והאהבה. He would always warn them to have love and togetherness. שיהיה ביניהם תמיד שלום, אהבה ואחווה. ובאותו יום, on that day, עברו על דבריו ועוונות. They transgressed what the Arizal warned them. ולעת ערב יצא עם החברים לקבל השבת, as they always went out to accept Shabbat, he went out with them to accept the Shabbat. וחזר לבית הכנסת שר וזעף. Came back to the synagogue after doing Kabbalat Shabbat, and he was not himself. He was like, not sour-faced, but like very terrible mood. וישב כל זמן התפילה באנינות. He was sitting as an onen, like someone just died. והערכו, meaning Rav Chaim Vital, כשראה אותו באותו סגנון, when he saw him like this, נבהל מאוד, was terrified. כי לא כן היה מנהגו לעשות, he never looked like this. לאחר שסיימו הקהל תפילה, הלך רב חיים אצלו ואמר לו, רבנו, למה ראיתיך כל הזמן התפילה הזאת? באנינות, why did I see you as an onen this whole time in the תפילה, במר נפש? אמר לו, הרי לפי שראיתי בקבלת השבת הסמך מם, because I saw the angel of death on Kabbalat Shabbat. Not someone you want to see on Erev Shabbat. ואמר, זה הפסוק. This is a pasuk he told me. גם אתם, גם מלככם תיספו. You, as well as your king, shall perish. This is a pasuk in Shmuel. This is the pasuk that the Samach men quoted to them. So it means like someone's leaving. מכאן נראה שכבר נחתם גזר דין בעוונותינו הרבים. The גזר דין was already קיים, but now it's חתום. There was a decree that the Arizal had to die. We saw that in the beginning, that Eliyahu told him, your life in this world, is coming to an end. You have to go teach him. But that was begeder gzar din. Gzar din could be extended, revoked, but now it's sealed. ולא נחתם אלא בעבור קטטה. It was only because of that quarrel. שנעשה יום בין החברים. In other words, it was sealed because of that. שכל זמן שהיה שלום ביניהם לא היה לו בית כניסה לקטרג. He couldn't enter when there was shalom with the חברים. וכן היה, and this is exactly what happened. בעוונותינו הרבים באותו זמן התבקש בישיבה של מעלה, מורנו ורבנו עטרת ראשנו. That time period is when the Arizal passed. וגם 5 חברים עמו. Also 5 of the חברים also died. Very shortly after this incident. So אהבת החברים was basically something very, very big that the Arizal adopted. And this is why the Arizal, in some of the Sidurim, it says that the first thing you do before you pray, Shachrit, is mitzvat ve'avta l'reacha kamocha. There's something very big about it. It's not just lip service. When you get to that level, it means you really, really understand godliness. And your ego is gone. It's like you don't see yourself as you don't see it's me against anyone. You see yourself as part of the universe. This is a big thing that the Arizal did. The reason why the Arizal, another reason that's mentioned of his death, this was like how it came to be. But the Gzerah is this last piece, which basically the Arizal and Malchu were learning, and they got to a piece of the Zohar, and basically the Arizal said, Adkan, I can't reveal you this. I'm not supposed to. And Rav Chaim Vital insisted. And he says, I'm telling you, listen to me, you'll benefit, I'll benefit, let it go. And he wouldn't do it. And Arizal had to share it with him. Because the Arizal's whole purpose in this world is coming and revealing Sodot to Malchu. And Malchu wouldn't let go. And he gave him the Perush of the Tosefta. And after he did that, the Ari said that the Gzerah is out. That I'm going to die this year. Because that I revealed you the secret and you brought this harm to yourself. Because if you would not be persistent, I wouldn't reveal it to you, and they wouldn't give me this quote-unquote onesh for shamayim. And I told you this many times, and you didn't want to listen. But you know what? This is not, basically Arizal said, it's worth it. Ve'eini chash alai ve'lo al bnei beti. We'll learn later another story that one of his sons died. Similar circumstances. The Arizal's Mesilut Nefesh for his Talmidim basically was to give his physical life over. The only reason I'm sorry is not because I'm leaving this world, is because you guys are going to be left without a tikkun. So this is like what kind of like brought forth the gzera to begin with, the premature death. But what allowed it to happen was the quarrel between the chaverim. So we learn from some of these stories about this chabura is really the things that they emphasized is the love and togetherness, and that's where they're able to get a lot of this different spiritual levels that they receive. So something very important when we go into learning is really understand the kesher with the other people. It's not just we're not learning for ourselves, but we're learning the Kvod HaShechina. And in order to learn for Kvod HaShechina, you need to totally nullify yourself between you and your friend. So, Shkoyach. Next, what I'm putting together a syllabus. I'll be sending it out.